FrSky are a brand who have been around drones and FPV for a very long time. In fact, for many people, their first proper radio was a FrSky, and one of my favourite radios of all time was this, the Teardown X9D. It was an extremely popular radio in FPV at the time. In recent years, though, things have gone in slightly different directions. For instance, FrSky went down the road of changing all of their RF protocols, and they've now gone away from open source software and more towards their closed operating system that they use on their latest radios. The FPV community continued down the road of radios based on OpenTX, EdgeTX, and later we saw open source RF protocols such as ExpressLRS, and that is where the vast majority of new and existing users of FPV are sitting today. That isn't to say, though, that you should completely ignore what is going on over in the FrSky world. Whilst they're not using any of the open source side of things, they are continuing to develop their software, their hardware, and actually they are making some very, very nice radios today. In this video, we're going to take a look at one of them, and that is this, the X18S. Now, in this video, I'm going to give you an overview of this radio. I'm going to walk you through some of its features and capabilities. We're going to tear it down, talk about the RF protocols, talk about ExpressLRS, and then at the very end, share with you my thoughts. Now, just to be crystal clear up front, FrSky did send me this radio over to take a look at. They have not paid me to make this video. They've had no influence in this video. And as always, my thoughts are entirely my own. Okay, so to walk you around the radio first of all, now the version I've got is the X18S. This is the more premium version of the two that are available. The main radio is the same between the X18 and the X18S. There's just a couple of changes. One of them is the gimbals, which I'll talk about in a minute, and there's a couple of other little internal changes as well, which I'll mention as we move through the video. Now, to start, we will go with the gimbals. Now, these are what they call their MC18 all-CNC high-precision Hall sensor gimbal. They have 10 ball bearings in each, and they are full CNC metal. They're not part CNC or part metal like you see on some of them. One of the big differences between the X18 and the X18S is that the S has the full CNC gimbals you see here, whereas the standard X18 has their standard Hall sensor gimbal with a metal top and isn't full CNC. Looking around the radio, you can see there are lots of switches and there are buttons located on the bottom and on the back as well. To walk you around the controls that we have, on the top we have two-way switches. One is momentary on the right, one is latching on the left. Above these, there are two small 3-position switches, so one on each corner, 3 positions on each one available. On the outside, there are two 3-position switches with the short levers. These are two 3-position switches with the long levers. Then we've got our two potentiometers, S1 and S2 here, with a nice detent in the center. We've got our trim switches. So we've got T2 and T3 here, T5 and T6, T1 and T4. So there are 6 trims in total. You've got programmable buttons down the bottom here, 3 on each side. These are countersunk into the surface of the radio. They're not flat with the surface. So if I just flip it up on the side, you can see there that they are down probably about 1 millimeter compared to the other buttons. We then have our controls for the built-in software. So you can see we've got model, display, return and system button, which is a rocker with an internal center button there. And then you've got a rotary controller over here with another center press button there. These are used for controlling the internal software. This radio, being FrSky, is based on their new Ethos operating system. This radio comes pre-fitted with a 3.5-inch color touchscreen. So not only can you control it via the buttons at the bottom, but you've got full touch control up the top here as well. I'll demonstrate that as we move through the video in a minute. Moving around to the rear, you will find some additional buttons. So here we've got 2 momentary buttons, 1 on each side, and there are 2 additional potentiometers located up on each corner with a center detent as well. Now, on this radio, there is also quite a lot of I/O. The first thing you would have seen is that on the back, there is a nano module bay. That does work with common systems such as Crossfire, ExpressLRS, and I will talk about that a bit more later on. So if you don't want to use the internal RF system that this radio has, you can use it with your own one too. At the top, there's a lot of I/O installed here as well. So if we just jump in closer, you'll see that there are 2 antenna ports located on each side. These are RP SMAs, and this allows you to actually connect your own external antennas to the radio. You don't need to use external antennas with this as standard. There is an internal antenna installed in this radio in the top, but you can use external antennas if you want to. There is also a headphones jack. We have a smart port jack, our SD card slot, our USB slot, as well as our DSC port located up there. And then the only other thing on the back of the radio is the battery bay that you can see here. If I just flip that up, you can see there's space in there for a battery. They've included one with the radio that I've been sent, which is a 4000 milliamp hour 7.4 volt LiPo. Pretty standard compared to what else you see on the market. Now, just something to mention on the back of the radio. When I was just showing you around, you may have noticed that the module bay cover was removed. Don't worry, it does come with a cover pre-installed as standard from the factory. It is nice and protected. It's just, as I've been using the radio here on the bench, I have been using it with ExpressLRS modules and others, and I've had it removed for that purpose, but there is one included in the kit. Now, externally, the radio is made of plastic. This is that lovely blue version that you can see there. You may have seen that there are rubber grips installed on each of the back sides. You can see there, that's got a really nice feel to it. That goes about 3/4 of the way up. And overall, the ergonomics of the radio is very nice, and it sits really quite tidily in the hands. One thing that you will notice about this radio when you do put it in your hands, though, is the weight, because this radio is not light. It is a quality feeling piece of kit. I'm not sure what the specification of the weight is, but I'll get my scales out and pop it on to show you. Comes in at 861 grams on my scales, as you see it here. It certainly isn't the lightest radio in the world, but I will say it definitely has a bit of a quality feel to it. Now, just coming back to the differences between the X18S and the standard X18. As I said earlier, the biggest change is the gimbals. These are the MC18 full metal CNC gimbals. I have to say, these do feel absolutely solid. Zero movement on them at all in the corners, no flex. They really do feel very, very nice. As good as any other CNC gimbal that I felt out there. I also have to say, I do really like the sticks as well. I like the grip that you've got. So if you're a pincher, feels good. If you're a thumber, they're not too sharp. Overall, I don't see any need to change the toppers on these whatsoever. Now, the non-S still has whole gimbals, but they're not full metal. They are what they call metal top, so I assume they have some plastic bits inside. Externally, the radios are the same in the sense of it has all the other same switches, all the same buttons, still has the same 480 by 320 color touchscreen. The only other two differences are that this radio, the S, has 512 megabytes of built-in storage, whereas the non-S version only has 128 megabytes, and the S version here has a built-in 6-axis gyro, and the non-S doesn't. Now, software-wise, this radio is running Ethos. This is FrSky's own in-house operating system for their latest radios. In the past, they have used OpenTX. However, today, they've transitioned all of their latest radios over to this new operating system. It runs on a much more powerful processor, which we'll take a look at later on. What we're going to do next, though, is give you a bit of an overview of what this software is like to use. Powering the radio up, the first thing you will see is that it comes up with the typical
Welcome to Ethos. Throttle not idle. Failsafe not set.
Typical FrSky logo, and then it gives me a load of warnings because switches and stuff are everywhere. Now, it's come up with a checklist warning, and that is because things aren't where they should be as per the settings. I need to put the throttle down and failsafe not set. That's fine. Now, the good thing is I can press the button over here, or I could have pressed the button on the screen. Now, the next thing I want to do is just walk you around the Ethos operating system. I'm not going to go into it in great detail. I'm not going to go over every feature, but I do just want to give you a bit of a feel for it. Now, you have two options of controlling this. You can use the control buttons at the bottom of the radio like I showed earlier, but as it's a touchscreen, I'm going to show you everything via that. Now, this is the main home screen. This is fully configurable. You can change this. You can put your model picture here. You've got your timers on the right, but you can choose what you want to show. This is just the standard setup. Then along the bottom, you've got a home button, your plane, your extra screen button, and then a configuration cog. This is our model screen. Now this takes us into all of the options for the models. So you can see here we've got a model select, we've got the option to edit the model, flight modes, mixes, outputs, timers, trims, and RF system. And I can scroll across to a second screen just like you would on a smartphone. You've got your telemetry, your checklist, your logical switches, your special functions, your curves, your VARs, and your trainer options. Now I'm not going to go into every one, but I will just give you a bit of an overview of what you've got. To do your model select, you simply go into that. You can simply tap on the model that you want. If I go back, you can then go into the edit model options. So here you can change the name, you can add a picture, change the model type. You've then got your channel options. So what does what, your analog filters, your function switches, and the features around S-port. If I go into flight mode, here you can set up your default flight modes. That's more for fixed wing users. If you want to use it, it is there. We then got our mixes screen. All of that shows there. You can see our mixes showing there. And then if I move the stick, you can see that being represented on the side. Our outputs shows us our channel outputs from our sticks. And if I show you that, you can scroll along all the way for all of the channels that are available. You've got your timers options. You can set them to come on at different points. Your trims controls. And then your RF system controls. Now the RF system control is quite interesting, and as I mentioned earlier, because this is a tandem radio, it does support that tandem dual band mode, but it also supports the legacy modes as well. So for instance, the options under here, we have our internal module control. So what is the state? Is it on or off? You've got the type. So if I just select on that, you've got access, ACCST 16, or TD mode, which is tandem, so it supports all those three modes available with FrSky today. You've then got the model ID, your channel range, your 2.4 options, as well as then options for your external module. What's good about this radio, as I showed earlier, is that you can use an external module with it, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. If we go back out of the RF screen, I can scroll across and you've got your additional options over here. So you've got things like your special functions if you want to set them up, or you've got your trainer mode options there as well. If we then scroll across to the next option along the bottom, this allows us to set up custom home screen. So as I said earlier, you can edit it and configure it. So you can do things like upload your own picture onto here if you want to. You've then got your timer value options that you can set over here as well, or you can have telemetry options. Anything you want to show, you can set that on there. Then, if I go over to the little cog, this is our main settings screen. Now, this has the main controls for the radio. You have things like your file manager, so this shows you what's on the SD card and the built-in storage. You got your alert setups. You can do things for like low battery voltage, things like that. We've got our date and time settings, so you can control all of that. Our general settings, so things like the language, the keyboard type for the on-screen keyboard, brightness, wake up, sleep. Typical basic functions you'd expect to find on a radio, your haptic controls, your storage location, because there is built-in storage on this radio, as I mentioned earlier, and then all of the other stuff that you see there. Battery gives us the current battery voltage and our battery display range setting, as well as low battery voltage warning. You've got your hardware options. So again, you can set the hardware on a global level for the radio. So your analog filters, your pots and slider settings, your switch settings. So again, you can set what each of them does and the positions for them as well. You can then go across to calibration, allowing us to calibrate the radio if you want to. You can see there, it gives me a representation of the movement of the sticks, the pots, as well as the pots on the corners. And then you've got your gyro calibration as well, because the S model that I've got here does have a built-in gyro. That's an extra feature that is only available on the S, and you can calibrate that here too. Under sticks, you've got things like your channel order, as well as the option to fix the first 4. And then you've got device config that allows you to set up additional things like the additional sensors that you can get from FrSky. So airspeed, current, SPEC, things like that, all configurable via the screen. And finally, I can scroll across to info, which just basically gives us info about the radio. Now that's a main overview of the radio. As I've said, I'm not going to go into every specific option. What I will say is I really quite like Ethos. I think they've done a really nice job of putting together a touch operating system that is easy to use via the screen. It is clear, it is concise, and actually in many ways, in my opinion, it's a lot simpler than the likes of EdgeTX or OpenTX. One other thing I just want to mention on Ethos is the fact that they do have a PC suite available for it. It's available for PC and Mac. It allows you to do things like update the firmware on the radio. You've got things like FrSky Flasher, so you could download firmware for receivers. You've got Audio Manager, Image Manager, Lure Development Area, DFU Flasher, Repair Tool, all sorts of other stuff under here as well. And actually, it's really quite nice and intuitive, and it allows you just to easily manage your radio depending on if you want to back it up, update the firmware, improve the model selection, things like that. Now this radio is obviously designed to work with FrSky's own range of receivers. You can't bind this to something like an Express LRS receiver or Crossfire out the box, although you do have that nano bay on the back and you can use it with an external transmitter module, and we will talk about that a little bit more later on. Receivers that support Access, ACCST D16 or Tandem or TD mode as it's known all work with this radio. Access and ACCST D16 are both 2.4 gigs protocols. Access is the latest version that offers the lowest latency and overall best performance in FrSky's 2.4 gigs range. What's incredibly interesting though is the TD or Tandem mode, because this not only offers that low latency 2.4 gigs mode, it simultaneously transmits on 900 megs as well, a little bit like Crossfire. That means you're getting the best of both worlds. The transmitter will transmit on both frequencies at the same time, and a compatible receiver with TD mode will choose which option to use. So for instance, if you're flying short range, it'll give you the low latency 2.4 gigs, but if you go longer range, it'll then switch over to the 900 megs, and what you're getting here is the best of both worlds. This is very similar to Gemini from Express LRS, whereas today Gemini only supports dual transmission on the same band. This is dual transmission across the two separate bands, giving you the best of both options. FrSky do have quite a large range of receivers that are compatible with this radio. On 2.4 gigs, you have their new Archer series as well as their Access radios. The new Archers offer their latest features and capabilities, but there are some golden oldies here as well, such as the RXSR down here, and in fact, I upgraded one of my old ones of them to be able to be used with this radio earlier. You also have their TD series, so this is their tandem dual band receivers. You've got some large ones compatible with PWM, but you've also got some small ones as well. Again, both these tandem receivers support the both 900 megs and 2.4 gigs receive transmission modes, offering that best of both worlds functionality. One thing I should mention is this radio is not compatible with FrSky Twin-based receivers. Twin is a new system from FrSky that supports dual transmission just like Tandem, but it supports dual transmission on 2.4 gigs. It is not transmitting on 2.4 and 900 like this system is with Tandem. Twin receivers are not compatible with this radio. The twin ones can only be used with the twin compatible handsets. As I mentioned earlier, you can use Access-based receivers, ACCST D16 or TD Tandem receivers, but you can't use the new twin ones. For instance, I was able to upgrade a few old receivers that I already had here. This X8R decased was upgraded to ACCST D16, and that is fully compatible with the X18, as well as this quite old RXSR that I had laying around. I was able to upgrade this to Access and bind it to the radio without a problem at all, but you also can use it with any of their newer radio receivers as well. Now, just to demonstrate the radio from a spectrum analysis point of view, we're currently in TD mode or Tandem mode. This is the dual band 2.4 and 900 megs. We're currently looking at the 2.4 gigahertz part only. So you can see on the screen, we've got the carrier pulses going across the screen there. This is the transmission from the radio towards our receiver. Now, if I just hop into the histogram view, this just gives you a bit of an easier view of those carriers. You can see there again, they are pulsing along. And if we move across into the waterfall, this will just give us an indication that is all the individual packets of data being transmitted and spread out across the band, hopping around just like you would see on any of the other radio systems. It's never transmitting at the same place at the same time. When you go back to the spectrum view, you can see it's constantly moving around. If I actually go to the IQ power spectrum, this gives you a bit more of a better view of each of the individual carrier pulses being transmitted one at a time, just at a very fast rate. Now, hopping down to the 900 megahertz mode, again, you can see the pulsing carriers, although you will notice that it appears to be less carriers than it is. It is a much smaller band allocation in 900 megs than it is in 2.4, and there you can see it stepping along as the carriers are moving. If we hop into the histogram view, that gives you a better indication of it there. You can see the carriers stepping along one at a time, and whilst it may look like all three of them are on stepping together, they are actually staggered, and you'll see that a bit better if I move into the waterfall view. If I just bring that into the center a little bit more, you will then see that they're not actually fully aligned, they are actually staggered. And if I again jump over to the IQ power spectrum, you can see the individual pulsing carrier there. Now, just to demonstrate that this radio can transmit on both sets of frequencies at the same time, this is a spectrum analysis view of the full band. So we're at 614 megahertz all the way up to 2.6 gigs. Now, at the moment, we're in access mode. And if I move over to here, this is it transmitting in access on 2.4 gigs, just like any other transmitter would. You can see there, the carriers are pulsing, just a smaller version of what I showed you earlier. Now, we're currently in access. If I move over to ACCST D16, the frequency doesn't change, but it does change how the carrier performs a little bit. However, again, it remains that we have a single carrier on the 2.4 gigs band. I'm now going to enable tandem mode, and what you want to do is keep an eye out down here, because this is roughly the 900 megs area, and this is where we're expecting to see the new carrier kick in. So 2 seconds, there we go. You can now see that the 900 megs carrier has now kicked in alongside with the 2.4 gigs. So what we now have is our transmitter transmitting on both of those separate frequencies at the same time, and then your receiver will switch between those frequencies as it sees fit. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this radio does have a nano module bay on the back, which does mean you can use it with third-party transmitters. Crossfire, Express LRS, R9 and multi-protocol modules are all compatible, and there is built-in software in this radio that allows you to use them. It doesn't work, though, quite the same way as, say, a standard Express or Crossfire module works on EdgeTX or OpenTX, and what I'm going to do next is walk you through how it does actually work on the X18. Now, installing a module on this is exactly the same as any other radio. Today we're going to use this Beta FPV Gemini one because it's the one I had to hand on the bench. So what we're going to do is simply slot it on the back, pop the radio up, latch it down in place, and that's exactly the same as you would on any other radio. Now, the first thing we're going to need to do is configure the radio to use the external module bay rather than the internal one. So we're going to go into the model settings, click on RF systems. The first thing we're going to want to do is turn off our internal module. So I'm going to select that there, collapse that down out the way, and then we've got the option for the external module. Now, under here, you've got the option to turn it on, but before we do that, we're going to select the type. Now, the options you have on here are as follows. You've got XJT Lite, R9M, the other versions of R9, Twin Light Pro, PPM module, multi-module, Express LRS, Crossfire or S-Bus. So today we're going to select Express LRS. We're going to enable that module. And if we scroll down, we can see we've got the baud rate settings, which is currently set at 400K. And then we've got options and configure, which we go into here. This will bring up us into this window here. You can see that it's detected the module And then we've got a setup, which will take us into this custom lure for this Express LRS module. Now, the version I've got on here is the latest version that has all of the options that you see here. We'll take a closer look at that in a second. But it is worth noting that when you get this radio, it may come with the older version of the lure script installed. Even updating the firmware may not automatically update the lure. You may need to go to the FrSky GitHub page and download the latest version of the lure script and install it on your radio, and that way you will get all of the options. Now, I'm not going to go through everything, but you have everything here that you would come to expect in the Express LRS. So we've got our rates. We can go up to F1000. We've got our Tandem ratio options, switch mode, antenna modes. As this is a Gemini module, we have all of the options there for that. We've got the model match, our power settings for the RF power, dynamic, fan threshold, VTX administrator, Wi-Fi connectivity options, backpack options, as well as the version numbers and the Bluetooth joystick and bind features down there as well. Now, just something to note on this compatibility that I should mention, and that is that this has been added by the developers of this radio. It isn't the standalone app like you've seen from the likes of the Express LRS dev team. That means it is not going to be getting updates at the same rate that you get apps and updates for firmware from the Express LRS team themselves. You may have compatibility issues with different firmware versions as well, and whilst it's nice to see that they have added this, it may be or would be a little bit more restrictive than it would be on the likes of EdgeTX, OpenTX. I'm not saying there are any specific issues today, but what you have here is a integrated feature that is designed to work with those modules that isn't officially supported. It has been done by FrSky themselves, and it may not have support for all or any upcoming features that any of the protocols like Express LRS or Crossfire may add in the future. Next, it's time to take a look inside this radio and find out what is actually going on under the covers. So let's tear it apart. Okay, so the first thing I have done is removed the 4 screws from the back shell. I'm not going to do that on camera, but that is that screw there, and that one down there. Now, I haven't taken the radio apart at this point, so I'm entering uncharted territories. I am going to just remove the 2 antenna covers. Now, if I just give it a bit of a pull and a push, I can see that it is starting to separate. Looking at it, there is an area there that is separating off. I am guessing and predicting that there will be cables going to the back or something. So I am going to be a little bit careful whilst doing this. It's connected at the top. So what I don't know, there's no screws here. So I'm guessing there must be plastic clips that go around the top of the radio that holds the cover on. I'm just going to grab a plastic pry tool and just use that in there to see. Yes, there we go. That popped that free. Oh, I'm trying to be careful because I just don't know if there is wiring or cabling. Yes, there is definitely wiring and cabling. So there's an antenna cable. Oh, interesting. There isn't a plug. There's just an antenna cable. So if I just carefully put that there so you guys can see, there is a single antenna cable that goes between the module there and the back plate. And that is it. So what I'm going to very carefully do is just pop that there. Pop him off. There we go. That has now released. And that separates the shells. And actually, what's really quite cool to see is you do have this backboard for the switches and stuff that you can see there. But it's got connections on that board there. I'll show you in a bit more detail in a minute that go across. And the only thing that does go across is the antenna connection that goes to the back. So looking at this from an antenna point of view, we have a single antenna that is in this area here. So that's going into that there. That's that cable there. And that goes to this left module on the back. And then on that module, there's also an int connector that goes to that port there. What is interesting is int you'd assume is internal and external you'd assume is external. But that's actually labelled the other way around. I'm going to have to investigate that a bit more. We've then got on this side 2 more antennas. Now, there is one located there. And there is another located there by the look of it, above the screen. So there's a there and a there above the screen. And that goes to this module with, again, another antenna port located there. What's a bit interesting about it, though, is the int on this one goes to the external port. The int on this one goes to the internal antennas, and the external on this one goes to the external antenna. That is definitely a bit weird, and I want to look at that a bit further. Okay, so walking you around the inside of the radio in a bit more detail. So on the top here, we've obviously got our main RF board. This is our 900 megs on this side and our 2.4 gigahertz on this side. The 900 megs only uses one antenna at a time, so you've got the internal or external. Still haven't confirmed what the situation is with that coax. We'll check that in a minute. And then the internal module for 2.4 has 2 internal antennas or the option of a single external antenna. This is a separate PCB with 2 separate metal cans. And then if we look around the rest, we've then got a baseboard here. We will take the RF board off in a minute to have a look underneath to see if we can see what SoC is in this radio. You've then got your bottom board down here, which does your switch controls, your buttons. There is another wireless module located down here. I'm not exactly sure what that is for. I need to dig into the instructions a little bit more, and I'll come back to you on that in a minute, but there's definitely a wireless module with an antenna. We've then got this sort of mid board that runs along here for our buttons. And then you've got all your switches and everything on separate little boards and connections that all feed in to the main PCB here at the sides. Looking at the gimbals, these, as I've mentioned several times already in this video, are the full CNC ones. They are absolutely all metal. There is no plastic here. All metal to be found. You can see the Hall sensors located on each one there. And then you've got your adjustments for them located on either side. You can get to that simply by removing the back of the radio like I've done here. Now I've removed the 4 screws that hold this RF board on, and what I'm going to do is just give it a little bit of a wiggle. There is sort of an edge connector that goes between the boards, and then if I flip it up, you can see that reveals our main SoC underneath. It is an STM32. We can see that in there. However, it is an STM32H series. So that is far more powerful than what we would find in the likes of an Express LRS Edge TX radio today. Now, just showing you that a little bit closer, it is the STM32H750. Far more power than on the standard F4 that we've been using in all the other radios for years. We then have our flash chip over here. Not sure what that one is. I will get that under the microscope and have a closer look in a minute. And then you can see basically sundry components located around the board. So having looked at all of this in a bit more detail, I've worked out what's going on. So as I said at the center, the STM32H750 single core M7 running at 480 megahertz, far more powerful than we get on your traditional Edge TX radio. Up here, this little chipset here is our SD RAM. That is 8 megabytes or 64 megabits. That is the RAM for the main SoC. And over here, we've got our flash storage, as this is the S model. That is 512 megabytes or 4 gigabits. That is the main flash ROM for the radio. Depending on which model you choose, the normal non-S model won't have the 512, it'll have the 128 megs. You can still though have your SD card storage that you can see up here. So not only does it have additional onboard storage, you do have your external storage via SD if you want to use it. Now this little wireless module that I mentioned earlier down here, I believe is their high-speed para wireless training system. Now that is used to link the radios for the built-in training function. So rather than have a cable between them, you can use this feature, and they've got their little module down there for that. It looks like they've actually got 2 PCB layout options. They've got an older, larger module, and they've got the newer, smaller module there, I expect. And that's then just soldered to the board, and then you've got your little antenna located down there. It's not going to give you the greatest range, but it's going to be absolutely fine for standing next to someone or just a couple of feet apart with that wireless trainer function. Now, just showing you the gimbals in a bit more detail. These are the MC18s. Now, they do say that they have 10 ball bearings. Now, I said it's 10 ball bearings in each, but I don't actually know if that's the case looking at this. I can count 5 or 6, but I can't really get to 10. Obviously, there's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. There could be one on this hinged part here, which would be 5. I'm not going to tear them down to check, but maybe one on that there. That would make 6. I'm not sure where the 10 is. I may have been wrong in saying 10 in each. It may be 5 in each. What I can say is they are quite smooth. I do think they would benefit from a little bit of grease. It just feels like they're a bit dry. There's no lube on there as far as I can tell. So I'd probably put a little bit of lube just on there just to offer up a little bit of extra smoothness. But what I can confirm is all metal, no plastic, lots of metal parts all the way around, exactly as they say. Something that I just want to highlight on this build is the fact that they've used these pins that go along there on the board to connect between the back section and the front section. Obviously, you still have the antenna that comes over, but for that I/O on the module bay at the back and the switches, they've just got these little sprung pins. It's just sort of an indication of how much thought has gone into it. Things like this are not going to be included in cheaper radios. You're going to have just basic wires going across. Adding things like this really does add cost, but it does show they've put a bit of thought into people having to take the radio apart. One other thing I just wanted to highlight as well is the fact that there is a UART down here. You can see labelled UART4, transmit, receive and ground. Not exactly sure what you can use that for on this radio, but there is one there if you did want to connect to it. Now, overall, just some thoughts. I have to say the internal of the radio does look very well made. Everything is really nicely put together. I've got no complaints at all. So, for instance, everything is on nice connectors to the PCBs. Everything is held in place with like heat shrink wrap where needed. There's nothing sort of loose and moving around that could get caught over time. You can definitely see there's a lot of effort gone into putting this radio together. Quite an expensive bill of materials on this with all of the different PCBs. So you've got your one down here, here, and all of the little ones there, as well as that one on the back cover that I showed you there earlier. That's just an I/O PCB for the external module bay as well as those switches. But having sort of lots of separate boards like this does add to the cost of making a radio, but it does give the manufacturer a lot more modular options around making different models, changing some bits, leaving some bits the same. There's even a board up here on the back of the LCD as well, which is a bit of an I/O board. Now, I did cover this earlier, but with regards to the antennas, as I've said, you've got your 900 module here, so the antenna for that is in the back handle, and then your 2.4 gigs antennas are located up there and there. There's really no need to modify them on this kind of radio because you do have your external ports as well. Now, before we move over to sharing with you my thoughts, we should talk about price. Now, when it comes to price, you have to be careful of not falling down the rabbit hole of comparing this radio to cheaper alternatives that have a much lower spec. For instance, the X18S has that lovely colour touchscreen, full Hall effect CNC gimbals, wireless trainer functionality, additional storage on board, as well as all the other stuff we've seen today. Price-wise, it comes in the US in at $379.99, and in the UK you can get it for $399.90 from 3DXR. What's interesting though about this radio is that US price is actually the same as a fully tripped out TX16S. If we just hop over to Radio Master, a full max version with again the CNC gimbals comes in at $379.99. So the X18S isn't actually expensive compared to an equal radio, and actually I'm not going to say they're quite equal. I think this radio is just on another level with regards to fit and finish and quality. So as I've said earlier, when you're doing price comparisons, you do need to make sure that you are comparing things apples for apples. Okay, so to share with you my thoughts on the X18S from FrSky, I have to say I actually really do like this radio. It's been quite a long time since I've used a FrSky radio. I've spent quite a lot of time using this before making this review. I think it's almost 2 months, in fact. And I have a few thoughts around the hardware and the software. Hardware-wise, I really like it. There's no question that there's a feel of quality on this radio, more than you get on the likes of the Boxer, TX16S. The plastics feel nicer. It has a weightiness to it. The switches, just something about it, everything about it just feels a lot more premium. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's definitely got a quality feel to it. I really like the gimbals. No complaints at all, other than they need a little bit of lube. They are absolutely fine. The screen is actually really nice, and that is also partly because I really like the operating system as well, and I'll come on to that in a second. But there's nothing here I don't like about the radio at all. Even when using them in FPV goggles, the buttons at the bottom are fairly easy to feel because they are so low from the cover. They are below that level. You can feel them, although they can sort of mold into one, but you figure it out as you move your finger around. Top, middle and bottom isn't too bad to get to. The switch positions are all great. You know, the ergonomics of the handset is as good as it gets. It isn't too heavy, but it certainly isn't too light. The rubber grips on the back are just in the right place. The reach of the sticks feels good. Again, I think the hardware is spot on. I also like the fact that you've got things like the external antenna connectors, you've got all the I/O at the top, and whilst I haven't touched on it in this video, it's quite easy to do things like update the receivers via the built-in S port. That's things I'll probably cover in future videos. There's just so much there that overall is very easy to use. Moving on to the software, and again, I actually really like Ethos. I have to say it. It's intuitive, it's got everything I need, it's got a good touch interface, and I actually think it's done a much better job on a touch interface than the likes of Edge TX has with its touch interface. I love Edge TX, I think it's brilliant, but I just think this is more polished. It feels like a closed source company made product, whereas at times Edge TX, OpenTX, they're a bit clunky. That is a result of community type projects at time as well. You know, if I think of ArdraPilot, it's a bit like that. A lot of people's input. What you get the feel of with this is you've got sort of a small group's direction on what they want it to look and feel like. And actually, I think that makes quite a good user experience. From a handset point of view, I've really got zero complaints. I think it's a premium radio. There's no question it comes at a premium cost, but I would pay this money for this handset. I'll be honest. There is no question. It just has a feeling of more compared to other radios on the market out there today. When it comes down to would I recommend you buy this handset, that's complicated because you're not only buying into a handset, you're buying into an ecosystem as well. But you're not trapped by that ecosystem because you do have the module bay on the back. that allows you to install things like Crossfire, Express LRS, and all of the others. So you do have options. It then becomes a question of, well, do you want to buy a radio like this and then have to put a module on it? That's only something you can decide. I think, though, if you are looking for a high quality radio, this is definitely worth a look. I think anyone who picks this up, I'd find it hard to believe anyone would pick it up and say, hey, I don't think that feels good. I think it feels cheap. I don't like this or that. I think you can feel the years of experience in this handset. Now, obviously, there is a huge amount of things I haven't covered with regards to FrSky and the politics around the RF protocol changes over the years. But what I will say is things have definitely settled down on that side of things now. You can say a lot of things about closing off third-party receivers and stuff like that. We have to take into account that this is a brand, it is their product. They're going to want to make receivers in that sense. And whilst we are used to being a community that loves open source, this is a closed source world. That is the world it's in. But there is a way of using open source if you want it via that module bay. Overall, I really like it. And I can't say any more or less than that. I think it is very, very good. And if you're looking for a premium handset, you should absolutely check it out. Now, I want to say a big thank you to the guys over at FrSky for sending this one over. If you're interested in getting one, I will put a link to the Horus website. It's not an affiliate link or nothing like that, but there will be a link down there as well. If you're trying to find one in the UK, just use one of your dealers. They'll have it. I'd like to say a big thank you to Steve especially for sending this over. If you have found this interesting and you have any questions, please send them over. I will try and answer any questions there may be in the comment section. And finally, I just want to say, if you'd like to support us to allow us to keep making content like this in the future, please do consider checking out the links to my Patreon as well as buying me a coffee. It is only through the support of my Patreons am I able to keep making content on this channel. And if you'd like to support us to allow us to keep making content in the future, please do consider checking out the link out. I want to say a massive thank you to all of my Patreons. We would not be able to keep doing this without your support. Anyway, that's it. Please do let me know what you think. Stay safe. I will speak to you soon.